Hey, if you're a long-time Galaxy Watch Classic fan, you've probably been sitting idly by for a couple of years waiting to see what Samsung would do for this next generation. It's here. I do think it's a bit of a beauty despite some early leaks prior to launch, but let's get into why I think that is. Before then though, it's now time, pun intended, to do that subscribe thing. Go on, I'll sit here, I'll wait, it really helps me out, and you get more stuff like this, so yeah, cheers. So as I just alluded to at the start of this video, when the leaks started to surface, it was clear that a loud majority of users really didn't like the new design of the Galaxy Watch 8 Classic. That boxier case, the ultralight buttons, and everything just combined to be a turn off to what seemed like to most people a refresh for the sake of a refresh on a classic design, as it were. I had the same general thought since those leaks started popping up. The Galaxy Watch 8 Classic though actually looks fantastic in person. I think Samsung was clearly testing the waters with the Galaxy Watch Ultra. The squircle case shape kept that circular display, but gave the watch a really different profile, and to me that silhouette looks way more appealing than it probably did at a certain point in time, as it's just much more premium than the circle design we've been using since the Moto 360. Not to knock that design and circle phones, but circle watches that is, but at this point I do think sometimes it can feel a little bit dated. That rightly or wrongly, obviously you'll have your own preferences. And I think to differentiate the Watch 8 Classic from the more rugged Watch Ultra, Samsung had to really bring in some design cues that warrant that classic title. That of course means to include the rotating bezel. Don't worry, that went nowhere, and obviously it is a core component here. It does just mean that the housing, or at least the housing of the main internals, is now in a brushed stainless steel case with numbered indices around the display's bezel. Traditionally, you'll probably know that the classic models don't necessarily get bigger batteries than the other models in the lineup. That does allow the case to come in at a slightly smaller size than the Ultra, so the watch itself doesn't quite stick quite out as far out from your wrist, even though there's really minimal difference in width. The Watch 8 Classic just feels a little bit smaller than the Ultra, and I do think that is a huge win for comfort, and of course it doesn't snag on your shirts and all that kind of clothing that you would necessarily wear. The Classic obviously needs to be a little bit more subtle while providing all the benefits of One UI 8 on your arm. I do think it does this really, really well. I will say though, compared to the Watch 6's bezel design, the Watch 8 Classic has definitely a coarser rotating ring with wider knurls, which you'll feel under your finger. To my eye, it looks more premium than the Watch 6 Classic. I did like that design, but it felt a little bit, I don't know how to put it, it just felt chunky for the sake of being chunky. The finer details on this wearable definitely feels really, really impressive. The bezel itself, you don't need to worry about this. It rotates as smoothly as it ever did, and I've had no issues when using this over the past few weeks. It's nice to be able to quickly navigate One UI 8's new widgets and tiles without having to swipe repeatedly or even use the digital bezel trick, which I think is a bit lame if Samsung are going to be, at least they need to stick with this design is what I'm trying to say here. I think similar to the base Galaxy Watch 8, the bezel, it's raised, just gives it a more pronounced look, which is something that we probably want to see from more wearables anyway. One of the major things here is that the Watch 8 Classic brings in a new element to the Classic series, taken directly from the Watch Ultra. And I think this is where confusions start to arrive, and I was confused ahead of launch as well. These new models now have that redesigned button layout with Samsung's quick action button, which I know this is a divisive element, but I have to say I'm really glad Samsung brought it over. For those who still want the watch to just be a fitness watch or a fitness device first, I do think those buttons are really nice. Those extra buttons on the side as well just play a huge extra role for you for usability. It is nice to have one option, but of course the ruggedized look doesn't necessarily detract from the classic design language that I spoke about at length just a moment ago, but it does bring that nice functionality that I do think is something we want to see more of from our wearables, and it helps differentiate this from the chasing pack in the market. I'll also say the upgrade from One UI 8 and Wear OS 6 does play a massive part in the Galaxy Watch 8's performance across the entire series. One of the biggest changes is Samsung's new tile system. So instead of tiles that take up an entire slot, as it were, or watch face for varying amounts of information, the new system works by stacking these. So by default, different widgets will fill the health, the fitness, and basic sections. Those would normally take up entire slots themselves, which does get a little bit confusing. Well, not necessarily confusing, but it takes up a lot of space. That's what I'm trying to say here. They're now condensed into efficient little sections that you can scroll through and effectively use them like applications. You're also able to create your own stacks with different widgets, just like the folders in One UI or on Android phones. The new approach definitely adds an extra layer of customization to a system that, for all intents and purposes, was pretty limited. Theoretically, you can have 20 or 30 widgets across One UI 8 watch, but it could take up just a few tiles on your home screen, which is something I really do think will be useful if you're someone who wants lots of information at a glance. And with that, Samsung also opted to add a few new features to the Galaxy Watch 8 series. As for fitness tracking features that are only available here, the vascular load option is a really nice to have on board, and it does extend to cycling rather than just running like the predecessors. I will say I'm not a cyclist by any means. I simply go to the gym a few times a week when my time allows me to do so, and I've not been able to fully test that out for myself, but it is one of those things that someone else out there will probably be able to go in depth if you want extra fitness features. Another large part of the watch is what One UI 8 brings to sleep tracking, or the analysis of sleep tracking. I do think as great as these extra features are, I can't say I'd ever wear a watch this big to bed. It's really bulky, it bulges out on your wrist, it's just too big, period. Even more so with this particular model itself due to those design changes. I do think that, like I say, the watch feels really bulky, and dare I say a bit breakable with that rotating bezel, because it could snag on your bed sheets, for instance. That said, it probably is more than rugged enough to take a pretty substantial beating. Personally, it is just my own preferences here talking out loud, and in either case I do think Samsung's sleep tracking suite has definitely broadened with this new series if you are someone who can stomach wearing a watch of this side to bed. I do think, as I say, if you want fitness tracking features and analysis, go check out some of the videos from the excellent Quantified Scientist. I do think he will give you better metrics, data and analysis that I ever could here as someone who's not necessarily the person who's going to be necessarily caring all that much about fitness tracking features on my wearables. Back to the core software for a moment though, and we knew that the Galaxy Watch 8 Classic runs Gemini by default, making it one of Samsung's first wearables to take on this AI assistant. Google is still fleshing out this on every other platform as Gemini finds itself on, but as it adds functions, more functions than Google Assistant did, it's likely going to be your go-to on a Samsung wearable over Bixby. So as with every Galaxy Watch previous to this, this is 100% an extension of your phone, specifically with Galaxy phones. You're just going to get the most out of it if you do pair it with the Samsung phone out there. That's kind of how it works at this point in time. Still, if you do pair this with other Android phones out there, with the likes of Pixel, OnePlus, even some Xiaomi's out there, you still get a really good experience, and most of the Galaxy Lock features are just generally one time, like the ECG reading, which you can do once every so often. Without it, the Galaxy Watch 8 Classic I do think is still a phenomenal extension of Android itself. We did run into some compatibility issues when running preview software like Android QPR1, but that's kind of expected. As long as you're running a stable build on your phone, there probably isn't anything you'll take issue with. I haven't quite used the Gemini feature that I alluded to a moment ago just as much as I would have liked with this watch, and the major reason is that the speaker on the Watch 8 isn't quite as loud for my own personal taste. That said, I do love the fact that Gemini is here and it's practically the full fat experience. Certain things might not be available, but you can just open them on your phone and pick up right where you left off, something that I do think the Google Assistant has always been missing. The thing is, I've personally been really partial to One UI 7 and One UI 8 over the past 12 months. I think they might be my favourite Android builds to date, but One UI Watch, I'm a little bit less sold on. It looks fine, it works fine, but some of the controls are a little bit confusing compared to other Wear OS watches on the market. I personally would have preferred just parity with the Pixel Watch 3 or OnePlus Watch 3. They're nicer to use, at least visually, but lack some of the features that Samsung can throw into their own hardware. At least the stuff itself isn't locked behind the Galaxy series. It's one of the black marks I will probably level against Galaxy Watch as a whole entity. Making certain things only accessible to Samsung phones does really leave a sour taste in the mouth, despite being a slick, smooth option, and that doesn't change here this year with the Galaxy Watch 8 Classic. Another problem is that if you're looking for Galaxy Watch Ultra levels of battery life, then keep looking. It's unfortunate, but the Galaxy Watch 8 Classic just gets slightly over a day and not much more in my experience. It will easily handle the full day of runtime, including always on display being powered on, and other features that I've alluded to in this video that you might not necessarily want to sacrifice, but it probably won't get you through 2 days without a charge if that's effectively all you want to know. It's been mentioned before, but the Watch Ultra definitely gets a bigger battery, and the Watch 8 Classic equips a battery that's really barely different from the previous Watch 7 base model. With that, there seems to be a little improvement, at least in terms of longevity. I'm okay with a single day of charge because I can charge this a little bit in over an hour, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't want more from a watch, especially at this price point. It isn't an amazing battery life, but I do think it's enough for me to fit around my lifestyle, and it probably will be for you. That said, The OnePlus Watch 3 really does smoke this in longevity, and it's hard to not want that level of battery life in every wearable, especially as prices start to creep up year over year. To be honest, if there was any reason to pass on the Galaxy Watch 8 Classic, it probably would be because of the battery life. It's simply not the improvement I was looking for, and even with all the physical changes made to this year's Classic model, the battery is where it feels as though Samsung is a little bit complacent. I'd imagine most users will want ultra level battery cell, or at least a battery cell size in the Classic edition, even if it isn't quite nearly as expensive or as extensive in terms of feature set. I will say though, with all of the changes in appearance, the general win is that bringing back that rotating bezel means you're not losing out on that one function that you probably want from a wearable such as this, and it means I still think the Galaxy Watch 8 Classic is a phenomenal Wear OS watch. Again, the design isn't going to be for everyone. It's a remix of a remix, which isn't always going to work. I do think it looks a lot better on the wrist than it does online, and if you get the opportunity to go see this in person, it performs just about as well as you'd expect. I think Wear OS is in a really, really good place. The fact that you get Wear OS 6 on this with Samsung's new functionality, they're always value adds, and they're definitely something that you're not going to get elsewhere. I do think there really is, in essence, little to massively complain about. It's a watch that showcases what Samsung is planning for their upcoming devices. They want parity across them, and I'm not really all that mad about it. The thing is, at that $499 price tag, it isn't a cheap option, but it isn't the Galaxy Watch Ultra $649. Let's put it that way. Samsung is still offering some minor discounts across the board, but there might be some marginally better options out there in the market, and I would say the biggest and the one that is definitely in my peripheral vision is the OnePlus Watch 3, which is genuinely one of the best watches I've used over the past 2 or 3 years. I want to ask you though, what do you reckon? Is this a good watch or is this a bad watch? Are the improvements enough? Is the hardware what you wanted from a classic Samsung Galaxy wearable? Let me know down in the comment sections below, and if you like content like this, then be sure to hit that subscribe button on your way out. It helps me out, like I say, more than you ever would know, and you get all kinds of content just like this in practically every area of Android, and in particular, the upcoming Pixel lineup. If you haven't already, then yeah, do that. Cheers, and I'll speak to you in a little bit.